there's been obviously hundreds of applications of VARA over the last couple of months and last year or so. From a regulatory perspective, what are the biggest mistakes you're seeing applicants do when they're applying to VARA, and what more would you want to see? What are some of the best features you would want to see with these applicants?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I've been in Dubai a little over a year. I think we had 13 or 14 fully licensed VAS when I joined. We're now up to 36. So we have enhanced the process along that. So and we still continue to work on it and tinker here and there. We're trying to do a better job of managing expectations and communicating better with the VAS. I'd say on the global, in terms of global and international players, the lessons we see where people kind of fall into it, that the organization becomes a little bit too distracted, either by other projects or other licenses that they're getting in other jurisdictions. On the kind of more local or startup players, there, some of the traps are we see business models that is not that well thought through or often can change during the licensing process, and that makes kind of everyone kind of take a step back. But we are trying to match the pace for each VAS that comes in. And as I mentioned, and I've got some work to do to manage the expectations and the communications around that.
Interesting. It's interesting. The larger ones are always, like, you know, with everything going on in other jurisdictions, and for smaller ones, it's always a business plan change.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, so obviously now once you've got these firms licensed, there's obviously then the supervision that comes into play. And digital assets, obviously, it's a lot of the data is on chain. It's very tech first. From a VARA perspective, are you guys looking at using RegTech technology, regulatory technology, AI, or other new technological tools to better supervise these VAS that are coming to VARA?
Yeah, so we're leveraging, well, we have a blockchain analytics team that we use. We're leveraging AI and event triggers so we can do more thematic reviews. You know, we've gone from, as I mentioned, 14 or so to 36. So the way for us to get leverage in the system and make sure there's consistency across is to use these tools, the RegTech tools, as I mentioned, and a number of the surveillance tools that other folks use, other VAS, from compliance standpoint, to make sure what we're trying to do is catch and identify issues before they cause harm or become proper problems in the ecosystem.
What are, for example, these kind of risks? Obviously, as a VAR, you're looking at it from 10,000 feet. You see all the different license applications, and you're able to use some of these technological tools. What are some of the big risks you see in that actually using such technology makes them come out? Sure.
So, it's the same kind of risk we look at when we license, we look at when we supervise. And quite honestly, VAS would be looking at this themselves. And I'd say there's really four to mention. One is customer protection. Okay. Second is financial crime prevention at a global standard, FATF compliant type of, every firm should have that from a KYC, AML, and financial crime compliance surveillance program. Financial soundness and cybersecurity. And as you can tell, three of those kind of focus on the customer. You know, I know on the show, as I watch all the time, there's a lot of focus on adoption, right? A big part of adoption is making sure the customer is protected, and we focus a great deal on that. And honestly, our licensed VAS should be focusing on as well.
Interesting. And you think that a lot of the firms could do a better job on that side, on focusing on these four items that you mentioned?
Yeah, I think so much what they do kind of flows into that. But those are the kind of true north that for any VAS, any senior executive, senior compliance officer, that's what I would tell. Those are the four things they should be focusing.
You know, for a lot of these VAS that are coming to VARA in Dubai, they obviously have operations around the world, as you mentioned, a lot of these global firms. To what extent do you expect that there will be standardization of these compliance requirements across different jurisdictions around the world, or even passporting? You know, where we have the VARA license, we're able to use it across different jurisdictions, especially on the four items that you mentioned.
Yeah, sure. So from a VARA standpoint, what we try to do is make sure that our standard from a licensing and supervision standpoint is at the same high level globally that could operate in any other kind of first-class jurisdiction. So I do personally hope we get to some sort of, you know, whatever we think the definition of passporting is, but I would love to be part of a global process where we get to a point where folks have shared liquidity on kind of on a global or almost global basis, so that clients get best execution, as well as call them clean books, where everyone who's entered into those liquidity pools have gone through global level anti-money laundering KYC standards. I think every regulator in our space globally has that as a goal. You know, how we get there is a question.
Because I can see how we can have harmonization, let's say, on AML rules, right? These are, you can agree on a set of standards everybody around the world is going to use. But when you go a level deep, or on some of the other items you mentioned, on customer protection, on soundness, on cybersecurity, every regulator has its own requirements. Do you believe we may come up to a level where we have harmonization on those areas as well?
Yeah, it might get to a little more where we're with TradFi, right? Where there are certain, what the Fed looks at, the Bank of England and the Bank of Japan look at, they're not exactly the same, but they have college of supervisors and that sort of thing where they smooth these things out. I hope and I'm optimistic we'll get to that point on the regulatory standpoint. And, I talk to a lot of regulators globally and in the UAE, and we share a lot of notes around this, as the world's first dedicated regulator in the space, we end up having a lot of these conversations with the virtual asset sleeve of a lot of TradFi regulators and some of these more mature capital markets, call it. And so I do think we're on that path where we'll be able to get to the point where here's how we handle things. And quite honestly, I learn a lot from the folks we deal with in those conversations.
Before we go on a break, and on this particular topic, how are you finding the collaboration with other regulators? I mean, in TradFi, often there's always rivalities, and some like each other, some don't. Do you find in crypto, because it's a new asset class, there's more sharing and more collaboration than in TradFi, for example?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, we're interested in sharing notes because everyone's in a different stage of development around this ecosystem. There's a few jurisdictions that are, have been at it for longer. I would say in terms of within the UAE, I deal with the regulators throughout quite a bit. ESCA in particular, our mainland regulator like us. I deal with those folks, and across the board in VARA we deal with them. We recently signed, or not recently, but not long ago, signed a landmark MOU that kind of smooths out everything from registration, supervision, enforcement, and inspections, as well as allows VARA licensed VASP to service UAE clients in other Emirates. On the global side, it's we deal with regulators in the U.S., Europe, Asia, Caribbean, and a lot of it is, as I mentioned, a bit about sharing notes about how they look at the space.
Oh, that's an interesting conversation with Sean McHugh from VARA. But don't go anywhere. We'll be back right after the break to continue our chat on this exciting topic of the regulatory landscape in the UAE and the big trends we're having. After the break.
هذا البرنامج برعاية فينيكس جروب UAE.
Welcome back to Crypto Weekly. We're joined again here in studio by Sean McHugh, the head of market assurance at VARA, to really do a deep dive on the crypto regulatory landscape in Dubai and the UAE. Sean, obviously we discussed before the break what's happening with applications and the overall landscape. There's one particular topic that I want to discuss with you is crypto marketing. Obviously, all crypto firms have to market to be able to get clients, but at the same time, there's obviously a lot of regulatory scrutiny around this topic. What's your view on the balance that these crypto firms should strike when it comes to the overall crypto marketing landscape?
It does seem like the space does a lot more marketing than TradFi for sure, and other spaces. And there's also an element of that's education, which I think helps the entire ecosystem. I'm very proud of VARA as the first regulator globally to put out guidelines and requirements on marketing of virtual asset activity. What we look to do is to give a path for people who want to get it right, not necessarily set a trap for people to get it wrong, with a focus on accuracy, transparency, risk disclosures that consumers can understand. But we do, and by the way, I recommend all VAS go on our website and look at these. They're not only requirements to the guidelines that'll give you a sense of case studies, but it also applies to not just VARA licensed VAS, but anyone who's coming into Dubai. So I do think around token and GITEX and that sort of thing, it's really important for people to familiarize themselves with that. Like I said, we want to give a path for people to get it right. We do have an enforcement team that goes after people who insist on doing it wrong.
especially with the big crypto events. I can imagine how this is a topic. Actually, on the enforcement side, I mean, what surprised you the most? For example, I mean, you've been in the role now for some time. There's obviously firms getting applications, and I'm sure there's bad apples who are not complying with these rules that are public. Anything that particularly surprised you with these, let's say, firms that are, let's say, not compliant in the market?
Yeah, so, and just to be clear, the enforcement group reports it through a different channel than me. But in terms of my opinion in terms of your question, I do think that I am kind of surprised when you see folks who think they can simply come in and try to conduct business, here in Dubai. We want to make sure that the license means something for VAS, right? So we're pretty aggressive on folks who choose not to get licensed, choose to go down the path. So our enforcement team is very active around that.
I think one of the biggest benefit of VARA is the fact that there's so much actually crypto knowledge within the regulator. I mean, the fact that you guys are focused on this topic enables you to have conversations with VASP on a very deeper level than you would if you're not you were not focused on the space. From a, let's say, licensing application, even supervision perspective, what also surprised you there as well? Like when you've seen these VASPs come in, are you generally satisfied with the level of all the criteria you mentioned before the break, financial soundness, cybersecurity, or are you sometimes surprised by the gaps that you're seeing with some of the applications?
It's a very good question. I do think, we do have a number of well-run VASPs who aren't regulated or licensed anywhere, right? Yeah. So sometimes this process can be a bit of a surprise for them. Our process is we try not to do one size fits all. We try to do a one size fits one. Sometimes that takes a little longer, but we try to get a sense from the VAS. Right? How do you handle? We are looking for this. How do you handle this risk, et cetera, et cetera? I am surprised sometimes even some global VAS that will ask, I don't understand why I have to give this to you. This doesn't make sense. I can promise you those applications don't move as fast as they could. What we really want is help us get comfortable, give us a business we can license, give us an operation that we can approve. That's our goal.
So if there's a message you had to, let's say, all the crypto entrepreneurs and VAST around the world who are listening to the show, what would it be, let's say, from a VARA perspective, especially from a licensing perspective? What would be your message to them?
So my message would be to come in with a business plan that makes sense, that you can defend. Come in with a team that not only understands how to sell the product and gather business, but has a global standard of risk management and compliance, people who kind of understand the infrastructure and the operations piece of it. Those applications, they just go much smoother. And like I said, we do want proper governance here in Dubai. So we're always looking for, folks who bring quality people here. I'm always looking for, the board, the non-executive directors that you put on the board. Yep. I'm always looking to see the quality of those people. Yep. That always gives me a sense of the quality of the organization.
It's very, very important from that perspective. Let's say we look down in the future, let's say 5 years, 10 years from now. How do you think a crypto regulator of the future will look like? Or how do you see even VARA will look like from a licensing supervision, or more globally on the space in a couple of years? Yeah,
it's a good question. I think we're very happy with how the Dubai ecosystem has evolved, right? We have a lot of kind of global trading platforms, but we have, a very diverse kind of group of operators. And I think they all kind of complicate each other very much. I think down the line, again, to go back to customer protection, because I think this is kind of the true north. I always feel that, in a couple of years when we look at 2025, right? Yeah. We look at Bitcoin ETF, we look at what's happening in Washington, D.C. Is this a moment or is it a movement? And that'll be up to us. That'll be up to the firms and the regulators and the other players to make sure that this ecosystem, survives. Not just here in Dubai, which I'm very optimistic about, but globally.
Yeah, it could be very interesting how this industry is going to evolve. I want to finish off, Sean, with maybe more of a personal question. Obviously, you've had a very successful career on the sell side, on the buy side in TradFi, and now you're obviously a regulator. Yeah. What did you find the most surprising when you moved from the business side to now being a regulator on a personal level, professional level?
Yeah, so I've been very lucky that I've worked at big firms that really cared about doing the right thing, and not just said that, but kind of had it deep inside their culture. And it wasn't just tone from the top, but tone from the middle. And coming up as a junior person, you would see that, and you can't really fake that. So. And I've been lucky to have, worked in Asia where we first met, here in the Middle East and in New York City. And and to kind of see, like, the biggest surprise for me for a lot of these global firms is their desire to keep the firm and the culture similar in different far outposts. And I think those are the firms in any industry that are going to win.
Culture is such an important thing, and it's very intangible. And I think it's very interesting, your experience on the TradFi world and how you're seeing on the crypto side. Now actually being a regulator. So Here we go. That was Sean McHugh, the head of market assurance at VARA. And thanks, Sean, again for joining us on Crypto Weekly.